Coast to coast, border to border, and around the world, it's time for The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a guest-driven program where the topics are diverse and entertaining. Laugh and learn while you listen to one of the best hours of online radio. Now, here's your host, Bill Alexander.
Hi, everyone. Yours truly, William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill, and welcome to this edition of The Bill Alexander Show. Today is going to be a pleasure because I have two people on the program, and they both have written a book called Witch Hunt. It is The Cold War, Joe McCarthy, and the Red Scare. And it is Andrea Balis and Elizabeth Levy. How are you guys doing this evening?
Very good, though. We're in New York City where it's quite hot.
Yes. Well, I'm just south of the city of Pittsburgh, and it's quite hot here, but it looks like we may see some rain real soon. So hopefully it'll cool it down a little bit.
Well, we can hope.
So the book, what made you want to write the book about this time of history that was not a very good time in American history with Joe McCarthy?
Well, part of it is because we thought it was really important when we discovered that I was teaching at the time at John Jay College, which is part of the city university system. And when we realized that my students knew nothing about the Red Scare, about the Cold War, about the concern, about the politics between Russia and the United States, that they were absolutely unaware of everything that happened after World War II.
Right. So,
and I think also, I was going to add, I lived through that time as a quite young kid, but I remember my parents watching the hearings and family members, and we realized there were people of our generation who had lived through it, who could tell what it was like to have your parents lose their job, they had very vivid memories of that, and we felt that was also a wonderful way to try to tell the story through some of that and add the history.
The people who we called collateral damage, the people who were not the targets of the government witch hunts, but who were related to or surrounded by those people and who were wounded by the witch hunts.
So a lot of people, especially my age, where we were not born during this time period, born late 60s, early 70s, we were familiar with this in the movie that was done by George Clooney called Good Night and Good Luck, which focused on the Red Scare and the McCarthy hearings. When you wrote this book, did you put that into concept that you were thinking about the way the movie was done, or was this just something totally new for you guys and something that you wanted to be able to share with younger people?
It was something that we wanted to share with younger people. It was something that, having taught U.S. history for so many years, what was felt really important, that people understand about what the Cold War had been and how it had dominated the American political and cultural world.
And
so looking at the way the book is written, you talk about the experience or what has happened, and then you do the fly on the wall. Why this type of writing? Why this concept?
Haven't you always wanted to be a fly on the wall in history? And right. I think also it was a way to make the voices of the people who lived through it. It forced us we had worked in theater in the 1970s. And when you talk about Edward R. Murrow, or probably in your own podcast, you look for a great story. You really need a story to be able to tell your point of view.
Right.
And I think that, don't you think, Andrea, that was what sort of inspired us to have the fly keep us short? Do you want to take it?
Yes. And also, what's hard about learning history is that unless you already know a lot of history, it's hard to figure out what's actually going on. And so people sort of give up. But the fly, who has been a fly on the wall throughout time, is able to sort of provide a quick summary of what the historical context was and enable you to just move forward then with the insight you get from the fly on the wall.
So For the people that aren't familiar with it, can you give a brief synopsis about what time period this book was written in and what it's about?
Andrea, take it, you're the historian.
Yeah, the book focuses on the period immediately after World War II, the period when the United States was emerging as an international power for the first time, and a period when people understood that the conflict between the Western world and the communist world was going to increasingly dominate the narrative that was going on. And so people began to fear that communists would invade the United States, would corrupt the United States, and bring down American values. And so they were on the lookout for communist influences that that might do this to America, and they found them, and they found them everywhere.
And just like a podcaster and historian like you are, you do look for those stories that illustrate it. And I think both of us, when we found out that they tried to ban Robin Hood because he stole from the rich and gave to the poor, and they thought that that was, and librarians in Indiana and state legislators thought that was the communist line, and so they should ban kids from reading Robin Hood. And then,
Robin Hood.
and then some kids who love Robin Hood went and protested against this. This story made it just so come alive to us.
Right. And it was, right, yeah, it was something we found at the very beginning of, as we started working on the book, this story of Robin Hood, the hero to all of us, suddenly being banned as a communist influence.
What I think is interesting is what went on back then. We're starting to notice some of that in today's lifestyle and culture with book bannings and stuff like that, because if they do not fit with that narrative that a certain political organization wants, let's ban them. Let's not give them an outlet, just outright ban them. And it's very interesting to see the way this book is written is that you give different scenarios in the book and then re-explain it through the fly on the wall. And there was one thing that I read further in the book, and I want to bring it up now before I forget it, but I did not think about the lavender scare. I did not think about that weeding out of those government officials just because of their sexuality. And I don't think a lot of people would have thought about it in the 1950s. I mean, we knew it was there, but I don't think we knew it was as prominent as what McCarthy was trying to say it was.
The thing about the lavender scare, and I think what Andrea, when she teaches history, often says you can't read ahead. What's very scary is that good people can make bad decisions thinking that they may be good decisions. Dwight D. Eisenhower, fought against banned books, and he really disliked McCarthy. But he was really fearful, as was Truman, that he would be called too soft on communism. So it really wasn't McCarthy as much who went after the gay people in the State Department and Army as Truman and Eisenhower, pushed by J. Edgar Hoover, but fearful that they would be labeled anti-communists. And one of the, yeah.
And it tapped into an already strong prejudice in society that was clinging to this myth that anybody who was gay could be blackmailed and therefore was a security risk. And people, as a result of that, a lot of people were fired from the State Department and from the Army as potential security risks based on that.
And when they finally did do a search in the 1990s, they found not one person had been blackmailed. And there's a woman who could have been the first Air Force general, and she was afraid to take the promotion because she thought if they came after her for being gay, that would come out to her family, and she hadn't come out to her family, and it would just be too painful.
Do you
But
think
out of that also came some people who fought back. So you can't predict in history.
do you think this I want to say gathered steam because it was being televised and this was one of the first things of this type to ever be televised.
Yes.
Things.
Yes, it's certain television plays a role in this. And it's sort of one of the first historical events that we have where television actually for the first time plays a really big role in the story of McCarthyism and of everything that happens during the witch hunt period.
And you're in Pittsburgh, but the first televised conventions were in 1958, both the Republican and the Democrats, when Truman got nominated. And it was so hot and it had never been televised. So there you got to see all these sweating politicians. And as I love to say, these very drooping pigeons that they wanted to have as doves to show that, you know, so that I always encourage people to find the details that you find funny.
And doves are always funny.
And Sam Rayburn claims they did not poop on his head.
Okay, yeah, well, I did read that. So in the book, is there one story that fascinated you more than others?
Andrea, do you want to tell one, then I'll tell Ann Hale, or which do you want to tell? We have many that we love.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that there are so many. One of the things that stays in my mind is the attack on teachers, though, is that and you know, Liz will talk about, you know, more specifically one of them, but that idea that teachers were just yanked out of the classroom and students had no idea what was going on or how that could be happening. It was an incomprehensible thing that these authority figures and part of their community were suddenly reviled and they weren't bad.
Yeah.
So now, Ann Hale.
Yeah, the teacher, she had joined the Communist Party, as many did during the Depression in the 30s, thinking that so many people had lost their jobs that there must be a way to make things fair. She left the Communist Party really way before World War II. She was then a second grade teacher, and the FBI came to her school board. She lost her job as a teacher, even though she tried to defend herself and said she really believed in the Pledge of Allegiance. She then got a job sweeping out dog kennels at the SPCA, and the FBI came to the SPCA, and she lost that job too. So, you know, but and you're in broadcasting, another person, his parents were remember, television was really new in 1948. So his mother was one of the first behind the camera people, and his father too were producers in early television, candid camera. But because of their leftist, they weren't even part of the Communist Party. They were worried they were going to lose their jobs. And then you can tell the chicken story. You like chickens.
I do like chickens. So being resourceful people and seeing that they were not going to do well in television, they decided that they would start a chicken farm. And they did. And the FBI came after them and their chickens. And the kid who we had interviewed for our book just said he was scared, and his father said, "Don't worry, they're not after communist chickens. They'll make front page news. We'll be fine." And they were. And we have always, you know, clung to that story too.
One of the most famous people that got called was Lucille Ball, because of her uncle. And because she joined the party very young too, because she was making her uncle happy.
Yeah.
Do you think whenever she was cleared, started to begin the downfall of the whole McCarthyism?
It happened, you know, and I think, you know, from studying history, things look like they're really connected, and they are, but they also aren't. Because right at the same time, Edward R. Murrow, who was a most popular newscaster of the time and had a wonderful voice that everybody, see it now, could remember. And he didn't like McCarthy, and he was looking for a story, and he found a little paragraph in the Detroit papers. Andrea, take Milo Ravovich.
Yeah, Milo Ravovich, who was the son of a Serbian immigrant, and whose father read the Serbian newspapers, was already under suspicion. And his sister read Serbian newspapers, and he basically was offered the choice of renouncing his family or leaving the armed forces in disgrace.
And he refused to leave the Air Force. And as soon as Murrow heard that story, he went to Fred Friendly, and Fred Friendly said he was the only person he would ever let him call Fritzl. And he said, Fritzl, I've got my story.
You know, the thing is, in hindsight, it's really clear that things are connected to each other. 10 years from now, we're going to look back on this election, and it's going to seem perfectly obvious what the outcome was. It's going to, we'll go, right. Why were they so dumb? They couldn't figure it out. It'll be so clear then. When you're in the middle of it, you don't know the next page. Don't get to read ahead, and you're just stumbling along. And it's only afterwards that we hook these things together and say, that was the moment. But it's as good as, certainly I'd be happy to have it be the moment that Lucille Ball was exonerated, be the moment that the whole thing started to change. I'll go for that.
So explain why McCarthy was so fascinated with communism, why he was going after all these people. I mean, there could have been any other senator, but it was him.
Or he could have had any other cause, but it was communism. I mean, he was a man who wanted to be famous and make his mark, and he did. And the communist fight just fell into his lap, and he took advantage of it.
I mean, the other irony of history is he was just a junior senator, but he was very charming. He wanted attention. But they didn't give him a big speaking job. They sent him off to the Ladies Auxiliary in Wheeling, West Virginia. That's not a very plum speaking job during congressional elections. But he was thinking of different issues, but nobody ever named a number. And actually Hoover told him not, and he waved a paper and said, I have 205 names here. Mm-hmm. And suddenly that made headlines of communists in the State Department. He didn't have a list. He kept, when he flew off, he kept losing it in his other pocket, but it gave him, he loved the spotlight so much, and he could keep it. He was quite charming. It's a mistake to think of him as just a dumb politician. He was not, and he was extremely charming.
And he was looking for a way to become famous. And this seemed like a good moment. And of course, that speech that he gave in Wheeling, West Virginia, that said, I have here in my hand a list of, and he named a number of communist sympathizers in the State Department. There's no record of that exact speech. Mm-hmm. The tape that it was taped on is gone. It was taped over, which was the common practice. Nobody wrote that. Go ahead, Liz.
No, just no conspiracy. We love to look for conspiracies, and you forget how many just accidents happen.
Yep. And here it is, this great historical moment, and we actually have no record of it. We don't know for sure what he really said. We have no idea.
When you talk to students about this time period, do they understand that electronic media is totally different now than it was back then? Or do they just assume that everything's been the same ever since?
Yes.
I think I would say it's a mix. We often have the acted out scenes from the book. Mm-hmm. And I think the underlying feelings they can get, and sort of the humor and the families. There was a woman who, when her mom was called before the House of Un-American Activities, she was scared because she thought it was a house where you went into as American and you came out something else. So I think they understand that. And I think, I don't know, Andrea, you talk about how much history changes or doesn't. I'm not sure.
But I think it's a really good point, because they don't really, from my teaching experience, you have to sort of go back and stress the idea what people existed before there were cell phones, and the idea that people didn't instantly know everything, and that there wasn't this barrage of information. It's really important for them to understand it. And yet, there's always been political gossip. There have always been rumor mongers. There have always been people who swayed the public. And it doesn't require television. It doesn't require the internet for people to be persuaded, to be swayed. And we have plenty of historical examples going back way long before the internet of persuasive leaders who found an issue and ran with it.
And I think also older students are being taught, and teachers are fearful of AI and artificial intelligence and plagiarizing. But we also want to help kids understand that just because you footnote something doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
We have 362 footnotes, but many people lied. So, you have to have a fly on the wall and understand the context and try to really understand what was going on when people said things.
Do you think if this situation would have happened today, it would have taken a life of its own with the internet, with social media, with the rate? There's a 24-hour news cycle now that we never had before. Do you think it would have been handled differently, or do you think the same outcome would have happened?
I think
you could take it first.
it's hard. It's hard to come up with alternative histories, but it would seem that it would happen anyway. That that it's not. Maybe it would happen. Maybe it happens faster now, but we call this witch hunt because when witches were hunted down, there was no internet, but word got out really quick. So, go ahead, Liz.
Well, I just also think definitely the fear that, and it's happening from social media, of kids secretly filming teachers and then putting it on the internet or even lying about it. So the fear that teachers and librarians, I think, is very similar and is happening now. But also are the people, which does happen, of who stand up for those people or try to, including a lot of kids. I mean, because they want the books that they think reflect themselves, and they aren't as afraid as other adults of the book. So there's pockets of young people both getting into politics and working about this that you have to hold on to.
With this book and with McCarthy, he had his own alternative facts. We're seeing that today. And I'm seeing history repeat itself, is what I'm seeing. And do you feel that it is repeating itself? Do you feel that we're going to have something else like this? Because depending on who gets into office, the gentleman that was in previously, it would kill him if he had to tell the truth on anything. Just listening to him talk just over the last week during the debate was just unbelievable, but no one fact checked him. Did you ever think fact checking was going to be so important in 2024?
Yes. Historians think fact checking is really important.
We've thought it forever.
And that's what we try and do in education, after all, is ask people to be skeptical and ask questions and consider.
And to understand also, one of the favorite things when Andrea teaches is she always, and we write, you can't look ahead when you're living through history. We can look ahead and make comments about what they did. And the truth is, you don't know. The odd thing is, for me, I watched my parents watch the Army McCarthy hearings. I knew it was about communism. I never knew it was about Roy Cohn, Trump's lawyer, trying to get a rich kid out of the Army. I mean, what brought down McCarthy was such a strange accident and obsession on Roy Cohn's, nothing to do with communists. He wanted his friend David Schein to not have to be a private.
Right.
And that ultimately brought him down. So you just don't know.
What brought him down was he started attacking Republicans, and the Republican Party wouldn't countenance it any longer. I mean, it was okay while they were finding communists in the Democratic Party, but when they started popping up in the Republican Party, then the Republican Party wanted to pull the plug on McCarthy. So he lost his backing, and he lost his
And Eisenhower, who, respected his generals and had kept them together, even though, they had lots of arguments during D-Day in World War II, did not like once Roy Cohn began attacking his generals. And McCarthy needed Roy Cohn's organizational skills and intellectual skills, and it ultimately brought him down.
Yeah.
He thought he couldn't do without them. For the people who don't know, Roy Cohn was hired as a very young lawyer to work for McCarthy. He made his fame prosecuting the Rosenbergs, even though he really didn't want Ethel Rosenberg to die. He thought if he threatened her with the execution that they would get more names.
Mm-hmm. And that was, after all, the center of how this whole thing worked, was that once someone was brought in and named, they were the only way they could exonerate themselves was by naming others. So it became a way, just like the witch trials in Salem, it became a way to control an awful lot of society.
And the other thing is too, is I don't know if people realize that it reached out into entertainment. I mean, we mentioned Lucille Ball, but it went all through Hollywood.
Absolutely.
There were people who were blacklisted for careers that they had wonderful careers, and all of a sudden they were blacklisted.
And also the hearings, the Hollywood 10 hearings, all senators and Congress people, they like headlines too. We get a little juice from gossip. So when they brought in the Hollywood 10, they also, Lucille Ball came to the hearings. Those were the first televised hearings that everyone got excited about.
They were, and what we decided to do was interview the children of those people who had been called before the committees. There has been, people have looked at the people themselves who were called before the committee, but we were really curious as to what happened to their kids. After all, we are writing for a young adult audience.
Right.
What happened to their kids? What happened to their families when, this thing appeared in the middle of their lives?
And people who had, they were very proud that when their parents hadn't named names. And their parents were quite proud of that. Even if they lost a career in Hollywood, then they could, especially actors, writers could write under fake names.
And did.
As Dalton Trumbo did, and Ring Lardner even wrote Robin Hood books. But if you're an actor, that's your face and body going out there. It's much harder.
So whenever you talk to these people, how did you find them?
Laboriously. We asked everyone that we knew who might know somebody, and then when we found them, we asked them if they knew somebody else, and we just began to track people down that way, and by writing to various people. And it's still, we don't know if people are sensitive to this day about talking about the accusations against their family members. And we did have to, tread very carefully about this. We had one person who we interviewed, who in the final interview we did with him, when we asked how the whole thing had affected him, in the end said that he thought that parents should think about what their involvement in the movement might mean to their children and to their families, and yet who was paying the price.
And whatever movement it was. I mean, he was, so he thought that should be considered. And I think that's important to understand, that things will sometimes really affect people in ways you don't know. And the fear really affects people. It's hard to watch your parents be afraid and to know that something scary is. I've always believed that kids know a lot more than we think they do.
when reading the book and knowing it's written for a younger audience, I think adults reading it, especially that aren't familiar with the time period, they're going to see a lot of um, I don't want to say foreshadowing, but they're going to see a lot of things resemble what we're dealing with in society today. I mean, talking about instead of with communists, it's all illegal immigrants and them coming across the borders and trying to get them out. And we have an individual that says if he doesn't believe that you're loyal to him, he's going to kick you out of the country. And I never thought I'd hear someone say that in 2024, but it was said over the weekend. And again, it's just so scary to see that something like this could happen in the 1950s, and yet we're living through something very similar in 2024.
Yes, but you have to remember it also to some degree ended. So we don't know what will happen, but change does happen in ways you can't predict. Andrea, you know history better, but rather than just think this is a total repeating, if it were repeating, we'll find out.
Right.
But it's never repeating in exactly the same way. The circumstances are different. The participants are different. The alliances are different. So each time these things that seem to be the same happen, they're actually not. They're not precisely the same. And it's in fact looking at the differences that's really important for us to sort of understand how it's not precisely the same. Because there are reasons to know history other than to watch it repeat itself. There really are.
It's in saying that, it's interesting to me that it was the Republican Party that allowed this to happen in the 1950s, and yet they're allowing things to happen today. And is it because of the way the party is made up, or is it a party that they believe that to get people to be submissive, it's all fear, fear, fear?
It's certainly a complicated one, and we don't want to say that it's exactly the same. We don't want to get caught in that trap. That it is the same political party is unnerving, presumably to the members of the party as well. We certainly see that the political history of parties, but again, it's more complicated because who makes up the Republican Party in the South in the United States now are the people who 50 years ago were the Democrats in the South. So alliances shift. Things don't repeat precisely the same way.
And in fact, actually, a lot of the returning GIs from World War II, they'd been told they were fighting and saw the worst of racism and Nazism. So they really felt they had an opening when they would come home to fight racism here. And there were many lynching of Black service people. And that was mostly in Democratic states. And people afraid to, even though Truman, I'm trying to say, people do take brave stands. Truman did try to desegregate the army, but he was also very afraid of losing the Democratic South, and they walked out of his convention in Philadelphia. So, and Eisenhower too. It doesn't turn into as good and bad as you want to think.
Yeah, it's so much more comfortable to think that
that they're bad and we're good.
Right.
Well, I think it's just the way human nature is. You always have to look for a bad guy. You always have to look for a good guy, and hopefully there's a middle ground in between both of them.
And there really are quite a lot of them, and that's worth learning their stories. And I think celebrating with all the accidents of it, including journalists like you, and Edward R. Murrow, who are looking for stories and afraid and still looking for stories.
And my students who asked me what critical race theory was, knowing what they were asking, and genuinely wanting to know, but also my answering them, but being really aware of the fact that if somebody was recording the conversation, I'd be in trouble. So we all do those things. We do them all the time. And this, the student who asked, they knew what they were asking. And everybody who waited for the answer was listening to hear if they would get it. And those
Yeah,
That whole idea of gotcha, that gotcha journalism or gotcha.
but I think somewhat understanding him and finding the people in this telling their real stories, it does make you a little less afraid. Because even if they were afraid, they were a little less afraid. So, and there is such a value, I think, in hearing these stories. It's probably why you're doing podcast, isn't it?
So with the book, is there another one? Are you guys working on another one yet?
Oh yes, I'm so glad you asked.
Andrea, why don't you tell what the title is?
We're writing a book about the 26th Amendment, which is the amendment that gave 18-year-olds the right to vote.
Okay.
And it's not, no one has written very much about it. No one talks very much about it. And yet it's a pretty important thing. And if we look at contemporary political issues, we certainly see how the youth vote is being discussed extensively, and the concern about how young people will vote. And so we're looking at that and how it came to be. And that some of it, the way it came to be, was through protests and pushing for it from youthful protesters who said, among other things, if we have to fight, we should be able to vote.
In the middle of the Vietnam War, and its working title is "This is what democracy looks like." But and we want to also remind readers and ourselves that the Constitution can be changed.
Right.
It's difficult. It takes and the inside and outside politics. They're fascinating about how politics of protest and people who are on the inside can sometimes work together, and change can happen.
They always work together, and then those alliances fall apart afterwards, and that's really the interesting part too, of who comes together and who gets divorced in the course of it.
So before I let you guys go, what is the one thing you want to say about the book?
Read it.
Read it. Read it and have read it and try to have fun understanding the history. It's full of, Andrea loves to call it, gossip about dead people. I love that McCarthy tried to eat a stick of butter because he thought that was going to coat his stomach so he wouldn't get drunk. He was a big alcoholic. And gather those little facts for yourself. Go interview people, not just read our book, but realizing that history is both fascinating and fun. I know that sounds like such a cliche, but it is. We laugh a lot when we try to write these books.
Yes.
So we don't cry.
Yes, history is fun, and it is gossip about dead people, and no one should forget it. If you read People magazine, you can get into history.
Okay. So where can I get the book?
We'd love you to go to your bookstore and order it from there. You can get it from every online source. You can get it. A lot of it's now in your library because it really did get so many starred reviews that most public libraries now have it already. Those are the places I most recommend you go get it. And you can also ask us questions on our websites. People can send questions and we will try to answer them. Not right away, but we do.
And what are the websites?
ElizabethLevy.com, and Andrea is setting up hers.
Right, and mine is AndreaBalis.com.
Well, Elizabeth and Andrea, thank you very much. This was fun.
Thank you, Bill.
To talk about history and enjoy it all at the same time.
Yes, and thank you for reading our books, and good luck to you.
So when do you think the next one will be out?
Probably 2020, I would bet 2026 or early 2027.
I will look forward to it. Thank you very much again for joining me today.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Hey, a big thank you goes out to Andrea Balis and Elizabeth Levy for talking to us about their book today, Witch Hunt, The Cold War, Joseph McCarthy, and the Red Scare. What a pleasure it was talking to them today about history. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, all you have to do is check out on the online retailers such as Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can also order it at your favorite bookstore, or you can check it out at the library. Again, thank you very much to Liz and Andrea for joining me today, and thank you for being a part of this edition of The Bill Alexander Show.
Thank you for listening to The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a $1 Million Baby production. For more information, go to thebillalexandershow.com.